The silence of Frivolity Station 7 was a heavy, engineered thing. It wasn't the natural silence of a forest at night or the peaceful quiet of a sleeping home. It was the hum of recycled air, the distant whine of the gravity generators, and the sterile clicking of claws on metallic floors. The station was a marvel of galactic engineering, a neutral ground where the most clinical minds in the sector came to strip the universe of its mysteries. To the Xylari and the Thul who ran the facility, curiosity was a surgical instrument. You used it to open things up, see how they worked, and then you moved on to the next specimen. Then came the salvage from the wreckage near the Veil Nebula. When the recovery teams brought the black stasis crate into the containment wing, the air in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. Inside was a creature that shouldn't have existed in a civilized station. It was a tangle of obsidian fur and sharp angles, even as a juvenile. Its 4 eyes, too large and too small, all of them a haunting, liquid amber, glowed with a light that didn't belong in a lab. It was built for the kind of violence that the galaxy had tried to forget. It had claws that looked like obsidian glass, and a frame that suggested a terrifying density. The researchers called it Subject 402. They spoke about its caloric requirements, its muscular twitch response, and the sheer lethality of its bite force. They looked at it through 3 inches of reinforced hyperglass and saw a disaster waiting to happen. But Selena Campos, the only human on the primary research team, saw something else. She stood at the glass while the others took their readings, and she watched the way the creature's ears, small, tufted points, flickered at every sound. She saw the way it retreated into the furthest, darkest corner of its cell, its chest heaving in short, jagged bursts. She didn't see a killing machine. She saw a child who had watched its world end and was now waiting for the monsters to finish the job. "It's not eating," Vaughn, the Thul lead assistant, noted. His skin was a pale, translucent blue, pulsing with the steady rhythm of a being who felt no fear because he felt no connection. "The nutrient slurry remains untouched. If the subject continues to refuse intake, we will begin the intravenous loading. We cannot have the specimen expire before the neural mapping is complete." "He's not eating because he's terrified, Vaughn," Selena said, her voice sounding small in the vast, echoing lab. She pressed her hand against the glass. The surface was cold, a barrier meant to keep the chaos out and the order in. "He's been in that box for 3 days. No light, no comfort, nothing but the smell of ozone and strangers. He's a social creature. You can see it in the orbital ridges. He's built to be part of something." Vaughn didn't even look up from his datapad. "It is a predator of the highest order, Selena. Your species has a documented history of projecting emotional states onto non-sentient biology. It is a biological fluke, a remnant of your evolutionary past. But here, it is a liability. The subject is dangerous. Its fear, as you call it, is merely the tension of a spring before it snaps." Selena looked back at the cub. It was curled into a ball now, its tail, thick and heavy, wrapped tightly around its face. She could see a slight tremor in its front paws. For a week, she watched the clinical torture of isolation. The station staff treated the cub like a ticking bomb. They monitored its brain waves, they measured the chemical composition of its waste, and they debated the most efficient way to dissect it if it didn't become cooperative. To the aliens, the cub was an equation that wouldn't balance. To Selena, the cub was a silence that needed to be broken. Humans had a reputation in the deeper reaches of the galaxy. They were known as the ones who didn't know when to leave things alone. While other races saw a dangerous animal and reached for a weapon, humans often reached for a bowl of water. It was a strange, stubborn defiance of the laws of nature. It was as if humanity had looked at the cold, indifferent stars and decided that they would simply force the universe to be a little friendlier, one rescued stray at a time. The tension on the station reached a breaking point on the 9th day. Director Krell, the avian head of the facility, had issued the order for sedation. They were going to move Subject 402 to the high-security labs on the moon's surface, where they could study its biology without the distraction of trying to keep it alive. "He'll die," Selena argued in the director's office. She didn't care about the protocols or the hierarchy anymore. The stress of the transport, the deeper isolation, you're killing him because you're afraid to look him in the eye. I am protecting this station, Researcher Campos, Krell replied, his beak clicking with finality. The creature is an unknown variable. We do not empathize with variables. We solve them. You are relieved of your duties in the containment wing for the remainder of the cycle. Go to your quarters. Rest. Perhaps your human instincts will be more settled in the morning. Selena didn't go to her quarters. She went to the supply closet. She grabbed a heavy, wool-blend blanket, one she had brought from Earth. It was old, worn, and smelled like home. She walked through the darkened corridors of the station, the floor cold beneath her boots. She knew the cameras were watching, but she also knew the security rotations. She knew that, to the Zalari, the idea of someone voluntarily entering the cell of an apex predator was so illogical that they hadn't even bothered to put a physical lock on the maintenance airlock. Why would they? No sane creature would ever go inside. She reached the airlock door. On the other side of the glass, the cub was a dark shadow, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. It looked smaller than it had that morning. It looked like it had finally given up. I know, Selena whispered, her hand hovering over the keypad. I know it's scary, but you aren't alone anymore. She punched in her override code. The door hissed open. The smell hit her first, the scent of a wild thing, metallic and sharp, mixed with the stagnant air of a cage. The cub's 4 eyes snapped open instantly. It didn't growl. It made a sound that tore at Selena's heart, a high, thin whistle that sounded like a tea kettle. It was a plea. In the observation room, the alarms began to wail. What is she doing? Vaughn's voice crackled over the intercom, filled with a rare, panicked emotion. Campos, get out of there. You are triggering a predatory response. Seal the doors. Security, lethal force is authorized. Don't you dare, Selena shouted, though she didn't look at the cameras. She kept her eyes on the floor, her movements slow and deliberate. She sat down on the cold metal about 5 feet away from the creature. She didn't try to look big. She didn't try to look strong. She made herself small. She made herself vulnerable. The cub shifted. Its muscles coiled like steel cables. It stood up, its heavy paws making no sound on the floor. It lowered its head, its 4 amber eyes fixed on Selena's throat. This was the moment the aliens had predicted. This was the natural order. The predator and the prey locked in a room where only one could survive. But Selena just started talking. She didn't talk about data or biology. She talked about the hills of Kentucky. She talked about the way the rain smelled on a hot summer evening. She talked about her first dog, a scruffy terrier that had been just as scared as this cub was. It's okay, she murmured, her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. You're a good boy. You're just a big kitty, aren't you? A big, scary, beautiful kitty who just wants to go home. The cub took a step forward, then another. Its nose, a black velvet point, twitched. It was smelling the salt of her skin, the warmth of her breath, and the strange, comforting scent of the wool blanket in her lap. In the observation deck, the security team had their rifles leveled at the glass. Director Krell held his hand up, his feathers trembling. He was waiting for the first drop of blood. He was waiting for the human's mistake to be finalized. But the strike never came. Instead, the cub did something that silenced every alarm on the station. It leaned its head forward and gently, almost tentatively, bumped its forehead against Selena's shoulder. It was a heavy, solid impact that nearly knocked her over, but she didn't flinch. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and sank them into the thick, obsidian fur behind the cub's ears. The cub let out a long, shuddering breath and collapsed, not in death, but in total, absolute surrender. It rolled onto its side, its massive head landing in Selena's lap, and let out a sound that vibrated the very floor beneath them. It was a purr. It was deep, resonant, and so powerful that it felt like the heartbeat of the station itself. Selena wrapped the blanket around the cub's shoulders, her tears finally falling into his dark fur. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you, Balthazar." The aftermath was a storm of bureaucracy and disbelief. The Zalari wanted to know what chemical pheromone she had used. The Thul wanted to know if she had some kind of latent telepathic ability. They couldn't accept the truth because the truth was something that didn't fit into their spreadsheets. They couldn't understand that the most dangerous trait of the human race wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their refusal to let anything be alone. They tried to take him away, of course. They cited safety protocols and biological hazards, but Selena stood her ground. She reminded them that she had achieved in 10 minutes what they hadn't achieved in 10 days, a stable, cooperative state. She told them that if Balthazar left, she left. And if she left, the story of the station's clinical treatment of a juvenile social creature would find its way to every news outlet in the Terran systems. Humans were a peaceful race, but they were also the only ones who would go to war over a stray cat. Eventually, the station administration buckled. The containment cell was transformed into a habitat. The hyperglass stayed, but the door was no longer locked from the outside. Balthazar grew at a staggering rate, eventually reaching the size of a small transport vehicle. His obsidian fur became a mark of wonder rather than fear. The most common sight on Frivolity Station 7, the thing that visiting scientists would go home and tell their families about, wasn't the research or the technology. It was the sight of a human woman walking through the arboretum with a shadow that had 4 amber eyes and claws that could shred titanium. The aliens still didn't quite get it. They would watch from a distance as Balthazar would playfully nudge Selena, nearly sending her flying, or the way he would sleep at the foot of her bed, his deep purr vibrating through the hull of the station. They would talk about interspecies symbiosis and behavioral conditioning. But the humans on the station just looked at them and smiled. They knew what it was. It was the ancient, stubborn, beautiful human glitch. It was the belief that there is no such thing as a monster, only a friend you haven't met yet. And in the vast, cold emptiness of the galaxy, Balthazar wasn't a subject anymore. He was a son. He was a protector. He was the living proof that when the universe gives you something terrifying, the human thing to do, the only thing to do is to bring it home.